Today we're going to be speaking with Christian Burnham. He is a senior, close to like 1 week away from being a graduate, yes, from Buffalo State College, the year 2022. And Christian has a lot of information that he would like to share with us today about the indigenous population, and we'll specifically be focusing on the indigenous population in the area of Buffalo State. So, Christian, I wanted to ask you first, what is the history of the indigenous population?
So the history is of like the local nations is actually very long. Specifically for Tuscarora, um, it's a little different than the other nations of the Iroquois Confederacy or Haudenosaunee that are in this area. So the shared history so far is that all six nations that make up the Haudenosaunee Confederacy were one people at one time. And the story starts in like the eastern area of New York. And as each, as I'm sorry, as the family traveled westward, there's different pockets of people that would stop at each area.
Hmm.
And by the time everyone got to this western part of New York, the other five nations were settled. They had their places where they wanted to stay. And so this is where Tuscarora Nation, the Tuscarora people sort of diverge from that history. So the other five nations being Seneca, Onondaga, Cayuga, Oneida, and Mohawk have all already been settled in their areas. And the Tuscarora continued westward. Um, a lot of this is like oral tradition shared down that way, but it's it's suggested that as we traveled westward, the we end up to the Mississippi River that
Oh,
far.
wow.
Yes, according to our stories, and at when we get to the river, um, we want to cross it, so we use this giant grapevine, which is actually the name of the story. If someone came out here and was like, "Oh, tell me the grapevine story," like we'd all know what that was. And so, as the people are at the banks of the Mississippi, they use a giant grapevine and they cross it. And as part of the Tusker people are across, the vine breaks.
Hmm.
So there's part of us on the other side, and there's part of us on the eastern side of the Mississippi. So what's decided there is that the people on the western side will just go continue on, and we'll continue our way back the opposite direction. So where we're from is the people that stayed on the eastern side of the Mississippi. And we traveled further east, but sort of southeast at the same time. And we ended up in North Carolina area. The people that had crossed the river, they're just lost to history. We don't know. We don't know
Hmm.
what happened. Probably integrated with other nations that were on that side. Um, but the once we reached North Carolina, um, we were there and became, the power in that area for, hundreds of years. And then that's the same area that, colonization took place first, was in along that coast. And so as time went on, uh, wars broke out, our people were being kidnapped and sold to slavery. And we had tried to stay away from fighting until it was too much. And so we started to fight around, I think it's like 1711 is like when the serious fighting started. And so what's known as like the Tuscarora War was from 1711 to 1712 or 1710 to 1712. And we ended up losing the war, and we wanted to take refuge back with the people that we came from. So it's pretty interesting to see that even though hundreds of years had taken place, we still held that connection to the other nations here, within the Haudenosaunee Confederacy.
Hmm.
And so we came back, and um, we were allotted land. Well, we stayed with, a couple different nations within New York, and then we ended up where we are presently on the Tuscarora Reservation, just outside of Sanborn. And so that's where we've been for a couple hundred years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that's pretty interesting. And yeah.
So where is Sanborn exactly?
Um, so do you know where Entrip is?
Entry. Oh,
Niagara County Community
Niagara County
College.
Community. No.
Okay, so do you know where Lewiston?
Yes.
Okay, so it's like right next to Lewiston.
Oh, okay. So a little bit, like maybe 40 minutes north of Buffalo.
Yeah, yeah, it takes about 40 minutes to drive. Yeah.
Okay. Does the history of the nations within New York State are how many nations do you happen to know how many nations are in New York State?
Um, I know of federally recognized nations, I know of 8 within New York
8.
State.
Okay. And
And 6 of the, I'm sorry, what?
there's a large tribal population in this area.
Yes, because there's a couple reservations just surrounding this area.
Okay.
Um, there's ours, there's the Seneca Tonawanda Reservation, and then there's the Cattaraugus Reservation. That's more like towards Erie. So like when
Mm-hmm.
we first enter the state, obviously everyone drives through that. And so there's that area. And I'm not really sure where all of the reservations are. I'm not quite the person for that,
Mm-hmm. No, that's
but
okay.
they are a lot in this area here.
That's okay. Thank you. So started mentioning some similarities between the nations. Are there other similarities that you're aware of?
So yeah, like the history. I know as far as language wise, and like the language family, um, the languages within the Iroquois Confederacy are similar to one another. I believe Tuscarora is one of the more different ones between them. But you can pick out words, cognates that, from the other languages that we have similar to Tuscarora. So it's cool to hear that with similar meaning. But um, in the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, our cultures are very similar.
Mm-hmm.
And once Tuscarora came back to New York, we had our own ways. But when we came back and became the 6th nation of the Confederacy, we had a decision to make whether we wanted to drop what we have, and truly become part of the Confederacy, or just become a nation that's presided, that's being watched over by the Confederacy. And
Okay.
so our leaders made a decision to drop our old customs and drop our old religious ways,
Hmm.
um, and become and embrace the Haudenosaunee beliefs and culture. And it wasn't really that different, but we still had our own, having lived separately for hundreds of years. You develop your own culture and your own um, style. Um,
Right. What cultures and language components were you able to retain or have to give up? That's
I
two questions.
that's okay. Um, I know as like culture wise, I know specifically our spiritual beliefs. I don't know much about what used to be when we were in North Carolina. As my understanding is that there's not much material evidence to fully say what Tuscarora's spiritual belief was prior.
Mhm.
But that is one main thing that um, we had to let go of, becoming the 6th nation. And I know that was it. Our leaders were allowed 10 years before they made that decision. So they had a lot of time to think about it and a lot of time to come to that conclusion.
Mhm. So, what things are culturally valuable to your nation?
Um, there's a lot. I think as like a society, I think one of the main things that we're known for is like our equality with men and women, and
Hmm.
that the women's roles are just as important, if not, in my eyes, it's like slightly more important than the roles of the men. It's everything. everything is through the woman. Like my identification, with our nation is through my mother. Though there's a saying that we have is like, you are what your mother is. So, regardless if my dad was from a different nation, it wouldn't matter because I would identify through what my mom is, which is
Mm.
Tuscarora. And another similarity and important part of our culture is our clans. We're broken up into clan systems, and that really comes into place when events like funerals or weddings or different societal things like that, is really when like um, your clan is very important. It's always important, but that's when it's like functional. Um, so yeah.
Can you describe what a clan is and how that's set up?
Um,
Mm.
yeah. So they're the symbols for clans are used from like different animals. Ours are animals. Um, Generally across Haudenosaunee culture, there's 9 clans, 3 from the water, 3 from the air, and 3 from the earth,
Hmm.
or woods or whatever. But it varies from different nations. So personally, like I'm Tuscarora because my mom's Tuscarora, but my dad, his clan is Bear. So, that's because his mom is Bear. Um, so really, even it's just it's hard to explain. I've never really had to explain clans before, so it's just something I've grown up with, and
Hmm.
it's like, oh, I've always known. Um, and it really comes into play also in like our government.
Hmm.
So like we're one of the last nations to have a traditional government only. And so that's made up of a chief and a clan mother from each clan. And so another important part of knowing what clan you are and identifying in that is when you have clan meetings where you come together with everyone, you know, in your clan to discuss with your clan mother what needs to be addressed, and
Mm.
if we have solutions or if they have solutions. And then after the clan meeting, when council takes place, the clan mothers bring the issues and the solutions and the ideas to council and says, this is what's going on. um,
Do you
so
think a clan might be, if I were to label it as something that non-natives might understand, would it be kind of like a county or a town or a
um
neighborhood?
I would like it more with like family.
Family. Okay.
Yeah, so like this family and that family.
Mm-hmm.
Because oftentimes, um, like 99% of the time, if you're the same clan, you're cousins. So,
Mm.
so.
Okay, so it's like a family gathering to talk
Hmm.
about
Hmm.
all the different things that need to be addressed and how they'll be addressed, and it's presented to the women. Do
Yes,
men come?
yeah.
Sorry,
So,
do men come to that?
yep. So it's open to everyone,
Mm-hmm.
but in order for like a clan meeting to take place, like if I wanted a clan meeting to take place, I wouldn't be able to. I'd have to go to a female cousin or female relative of mine, or go to my clan mother,
Mm-hmm.
and my clan mother would call for a clan meeting. So like
Oh
I
wow.
couldn't just be like, oh, we need a clan meeting. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I would have to go through that way.
Is it predominantly run by women or everybody?
Um, it's usually run by, I would say, the clan mother.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and as far as the participants, there's quite a few women that do go,
Mm-hmm.
um, in comparison to men, I would say.
Okay.
Um, I've only been to a couple, so.
So I know that you're talking about how the roles of women are valued in a little
Hmm.
differently than in, let's say, I don't know if saying traditional United States would be appropriate,
Hmm.
but or the others that colonized maybe.
Hmm.
um, but I'm just wondering what the role of men are in
Um, so, well, the men would become the chiefs, but the men are only put up. They're, mm, let me use different terminology. The men would, chiefs are only decided by the clan mother. So it's
Okay.
not like a man can't come up and be like, oh, I want to be chief. It's the clan mother decides who is chief, and then
Okay.
it's within the clan mother's rights to depose a chief
Mm.
if he's not, working for the benefit of the people.
Okay.
So there's one role of men, with the chiefs, but I think in a like a traditional sense, I was just talking to someone today about this too. Um, she was telling me in a traditional sense, the roles were, men were more, um, their realm was like in the woods, and the
Mm.
women were like the open land, so like the gardening, and so she was talking about how from someone looking in, it would be easy to say that the women were subservient
Mm-hmm.
to the men, whereas that wasn't the case. It was just an understanding that um, where they worked and where they, um, their different roles for that society
Mm-hmm.
back in that day. And so a
That
lot
makes
of that,
sense.
yeah, a lot of that sort of still translates over, um, even to modern day, just the different societal roles that men play compared to
Mm-hmm.
women.
Is there any information that you could provide on spiritual beliefs?
Yeah, so I don't think I can get into like the nitty gritty,
Mm-hmm.
but um, basically, it's all about thankfulness and gratitude
Mm-hmm.
is a major component to all of our ceremonies and to um, just the spiritual beliefs in our way of life. It's not even just like I don't even like want to put religion on it because you know religion just has like, oh, you go somewhere, partake in a service and you leave, whereas
Right.
these beliefs are like how you live. And so it's really, like I said, it's really centralized about Thanksgiving. We have like a Thanksgiving address, and that people say every day in the mornings. And really, what that is that you give thanks for everyone that's around you, and then you're supposed to go from the earth upwards to the sky. So anything on the ground or like in the water, you give thanks for the water, and you give thanks for the fish, and then you give thanks for the plants, and then you give thanks for the fruits, and then you give thanks for the trees, and then you give thanks for the birds, and then you give thanks for, um, and etc., etc. And they can be quite lengthy, but just in that order, you can see how it goes. From the ground all the way up, and in the end, give thanks to the Creator.
So
Um,
that's very different than the idea of Thanksgiving where we stuff our faces until we
yeah,
can't move.
yeah. So different Thanksgiving, actual
Yes,
Thanksgiving.
the actual Thanksgiving is a lot more detailed in
Hmm.
really giving thanks to
Hmm.
every living creature that impacts your life.
Hmm.
It sounds, yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
So what if somebody were native and they weren't registered in their nation? How do they do that?
Mm. Um, so that differs from each nation, but generally, it is you are what your mother is,
Mm-hmm.
and if there's many scenarios where people where native dads, Tuscarora dads, have children with non-native white women, and their children aren't allowed to be enrolled because they don't have their mother isn't Tuscarora,
Mm.
you know. So it
Mm-hmm.
comes to that situation with registration and enrollment, and for a lot of people, it's a very divisive um, topic. But for me, I don't think it is because I'm in this, I'm within that realm. I
Yeah.
am enrolled, so it's hard for me to pull myself out of that because that's
Mm-hmm.
just the way I've grown up. Um, but there are people also that who are eligible but won't because they um, feel why do I have to enroll or register to prove that I'm native,
Mm.
because we go to the border, and one of the treaties say that we're allowed to cross the border freely,
Canada,
and
you mean?
yeah, to Canada.
Okay.
So when we get there, they ask for us to prove that we're native, and so that means we would have to enroll within our nation, and then we have like a red card, from our nation signifying, that we are enrolled and whatnot. And so we're supposed to prove, the only people that have to prove we are who we say we are, you know.
Mm.
So that's one of the other things why registration is such a um, hefty issue too, um, is because why do we have to prove that? Like I said, you know,
Would you technically be considered a resident of two countries?
so another consensus of people that I've spoken to was so in the early 1900s, US has. Do you mean about, okay, so can you ask your question again? Because I might be
Yes,
answering differently.
because the territories that
Mhm,
native population would live on,
mhm,
and because of the, I think the United States in general kind of perceives residency as land, whereas I don't think that the native population would necessarily designate land as your connection to your nation,
mhm.
right?
Right.
So I'm wondering if, like, if you're registered in a nation, are you then considered a United States resident and a native resident
Um,
in your nation? Like
well,
two.
yeah, so the general consensus is that we are Tuscarora, period.
Okay.
Um, and so, we have Haudenosaunee reservations on this side of the border and the other side. So
Mm-hmm.
if I wanted to, I could go up to Canada and live on the reservation there.
Okay.
Because, we are Haudenosaunee.
Yes.
Um, but as far as like the views of citizenship, even though the US had, in the early 1900s, declared that any native person is a US citizen, um, what I gather is that, that's not wanted. We never asked for that,
Right. It's
you
kind of
know.
like the
Mhm.
United States plopped themselves down on
Yes.
top of your nation, and now
Hmm.
you're being asked to just
Hmm.
become part of it. So you want to
Hmm.
retain your nation and your registration and own, and in that, although you shouldn't have to prove
Hmm.
your legitimacy to be part of your nation by having
Hmm.
to register.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
and some other aspects too is like we don't say the Pledge of Allegiance.
Mm-hmm.
Um, even in the elementary school that we have here on the reservation. Um, and another divisive topic too is that voting. Like,
Mm.
we don't usually vote because that's not our government. Our government is our council.
Okay. That's
But
interesting. Then it's interesting to me that I mean, I think it's important to have native individual identifying individuals as part of, say, Congress or something like
mhm,
that, so that there's the voice of your nation
mhm,
in the politics of the United States.
mhm.
But how how would you view that?
Um, I would. I don't know. I know people would have issues with that. Um, and even even people on the reservation today, some of them do vote. So it's not saying that like all of us don't,
Right.
but the general thought is that we don't.
I
Um,
understand.
and as far as like a native person in government,
Hmm.
um, I don't really know because I know there's, a lot of dealings with, the BIA, the
Hmm.
Bureau of Indian Affairs, and some of those people are, native people. Um, I don't think I would ever look to be involved. But that's my own personal opinion.
Right.
Um,
I'm just thinking of like different policies and bills that
mhm,
are presented in Congress that would possibly benefit
mhm,
the native tribal nations, and maybe it's sort of like another country sitting on in Congress
Hmm.
of another country
Yeah.
so that their needs are met.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not really sure. I just know,
Okay.
US government is like, oh, you're all citizens, so might as well,
Right,
you
right.
know.
But you
Um,
don't see it that way
yeah.
necessarily, like the tribe,
Yeah.
the nation.
Uh-huh. And I know I was excited when, the Deb Holland was named, you know, head of
Yeah.
the BIA. Like I felt
Yeah.
like that was momentous.
Yes.
Um, Especially since she is a woman, you
Right.
know, but um I don't know what the reception was from her own people.
From our own people, right? So I have one last question for you,
Mhm.
and I'm not sure if you've answered it already, but are there different experiences of Indigenous people who are on reservations and who
Mhm.
are off reservations?
Yes, I would say that there can be both similar and different at the same time. I can only speak from my own personal experience of living, been raised off the reservation, but my both my parents were raised on, so like I can
Mm-hmm.
share both of those a little bit. Um, I know um, growing up, I had a when I became a teenager, identity was, I don't know if you want to call it an identity crisis, but I didn't really know how to identify because I would grow up being told, oh, you're Tuscarora turtle. And having come back to, the reservation for trips all the time, I knew that as well, but I would go back home and everyone around me, is white, and they're
Mm,
not they're
yep.
not native. And that led to, me realizing the difference in the family dynamics are different and,
Mm,
led to me thinking something was wrong with my family because we didn't look anything like the other families around me.
mhm.
Um, and so, those experiences I would say are different. Whereas, if I had grown up on the reservation, it'd be easier for me to, identify and do that. But um, poverty, I would say, is I don't want to give the idea that every native is poverty stricken, but
Right.
statistically, every native is poverty stricken.
Right.
Um, so like growing up, I did grow up in poverty. Um, but it was not the same type of poverty that my dad grew up in. He grew
Mhm.
up with no water. Even my boyfriend's, some of his family members talk about having to go out and pump their water. This was like 40 years ago, 30,
Yeah.
40 years ago. And, or, my dad's experience of, he had to go out and hunt every day because otherwise his family was going to have food, and that was his experience growing up. Um, and even though, like I said, I did grow up in, I would say poverty, off the reservation, it was not the same level
Not
as,
the same level of
yeah.
poverty.
Hmm. And in a lot of ways, there, reservation life is almost like a third world experience.
Mm,
Um, we still don't have running water. As a whole, we don't have like a water system. And, everyone has a well, and um, sometimes the water is not good because there's been um, nuclear waste dumped on the reservation. And so, our water is not good. Some areas are good to drink, some aren't.
mm-hmm.
And so people still have to go out and buy water or get
Mm,
water delivered to their house. That's just a regular, everyday thing. We have a water truck that goes out and delivers into people's tanks, for their water. And so out here, that's normal. But if you talked about that elsewhere, like, oh, you get water delivered, you know what I mean? Like you got
yeah.
to ration your water out till the next delivery. And so, you know,
You mentioned hunt that your father had to hunt to get his own food. Is
mhm,
that something common as far as hunting and maybe even gardening? Is the land
mhm.
okay to sustain you and things like that?
Yeah. So there's a lot of people that still hunt, whether it's here or on different reses. People still hunt, and we were very much a farming community. And I feel like that's something that we brought up from Tuscarora, I mean, from North Carolina as well. Even then, we were farming,
Mm-hmm.
um, a farming community. So even now, we have a lot of farmers who will grow food, um, whether it's for themselves or for certain foods for like different ceremonies or traditions for the nation. So that is another avenue that people still do today, is farming.
I know this is off topic, but I
Mhm.
remember hearing that corn was very important. Is
Yes.
that still is that the case in your
Hmm.
nation?
Yep.
Yes.
So corn is one of the main things. We call it the three sisters: corn, beans, and squash. In a traditional sense, that's what
Mm-hmm.
the farms would be made of, and corn plays a very, very big part in Haudenosaunee culture.
Okay. Thank you so much for
Yeah,
introducing us to your nation and um, the history and everything. I think this is really important, and it really helps us to understand better what Native populations go through in our area. So thank you.
you're
And I
welcome.
know
Thank you.
we're, yeah. Okay, thanks.